My name is Mike Provenzano. I am the safety officer for the Belmar Fire Department. I've been in the fire service since 1992.
Okay. And what inspired you to join the fire service?
Well, growing up, I always wanted to be a fireman. You see Johnny and Roy on TV, and when I was younger, watching Emergency, and just fascinated by the profession, and something I always wanted to do.
Yep. When I was a kid, every chance I got, I had Emergency 51 on. So what do you remember about your first days as a firefighter?
I joined with 4 of my closest friends, and we went through the academy together, and we served together for a few years until we all went in our different directions, and we're still good friends today.
How did you feel putting on turnout gear the first time?
A little nervous. It was, but it felt pretty good. And it was the day, I put it on the day we joined. We had to drag hose, we had to climb ladders. That's what we did back then. And, it felt good to put it on.
So you remember your first drill?
But I was nervous.
Yeah. What has being a firefighter taught you about yourself?
It just taught me a lot about interpersonal relationships with people. How to, it's a brotherhood, so you get to know people, you get to foster relationships with people. And I think that helped me out a lot moving forward, because it made me more open, more willing to take risk or take chances in certain aspects of my life, and to do something with pride.
What does belonging to this fire company mean to you?
My fire company we're all brothers. We look after each other. We help each other out. Just like any family, we argue at times, but it's still family. And we look after our kids. We're just there for each other. And I'm blessed to be in a company and in a department where I'm accepted, and where they're willing to let me continue doing what I love to do.
What would you tell someone, a friend or a stranger, who tells you that they're thinking of becoming a firefighter?
I'd say just do it. You're never going to know until you take that chance. It's such a rewarding feeling, especially when you volunteer, to give back to your community, to give back to the people that are your neighbors. The people that call you are having the worst day of their life, and you're there to hopefully make it better. And that's what we're trained to do.
From the time you joined up until now, can you run along that timeline and tell me some of the various roles or positions that you've had in your fire company?
Well, I was a firefighter up until 2000, and I became a lieutenant. I was a lieutenant all through 2002. 2003, I was captain of my fire company, and life changes, and I went on to other things for a while and raised my family and came back, and I was blessed to be selected as the chief of my company, and that made me feel good at the time, and now I'm currently serving as a safety officer for the department, and that's very rewarding too.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So with this long service, what does it mean to you to see the tradition carried on in your family with your son?
It means a lot to me. My son, he is currently the captain of my fire company, and he's doing very well. He's liked by the other members, and was included all the way, in the beginning. And I try to stay out of his way a little bit, let him lead, and that's important. I didn't want to get in his way. He didn't get in my way. I'm not getting in his way.
Do you remember your reaction when he first decided to join?
I was happy. It was, I guess, just growing up around the firehouse and the fire service, and he knew what to expect. And he's been there on certain things, and encouraging him to go through the fire academy and finish, and seeing him and handing him his shield on the day he graduated was probably one of the happiest moments of me being a father, as well as being a senior member of my company. It made me feel good handing him that shield.
Oh, you got to hand it to him.
I got to hand him a shield. Yeah.
Nice. What's it been like serving alongside him?
It's been rewarding. We do argue at times on certain aspects of it, but it is what it is. And he gets over it, I get over it, and we move on. He's a good kid, and he gets along well with the other members of the company, and he joined with a couple of his friends too, which makes it easier on him. And he actually is doing very well.
Have you ever had the opportunity to ride the back of the truck with him and end up on the same crew with him?
I have not. I've ended up on the truck with him a few times, and watched him in action, and that made me feel good. Knowing that he's doing what he was taught to do safely, and and just watching him lead the other members, the younger members especially, helping them acclimate to the fire service, and getting them on board, and being a leader, and that makes me feel good as a parent as well. We're watching him do the right thing and transferring it on to other.
Yes, nice. For you, what's been the biggest surprise about the fire service compared to what you expected?
I want to say it had to be the amount of training that's involved in the whole process, because you never stop learning. And that's something that kind of surprised me about the service. You think, hey, I'm a fireman. Here, give me a hat and a halogen tool, and I'm going to go break doors down and squirt water on the fire and stuff. But there's a lot more to it now, and it's not just about, putting fire out. It's about learning dynamics of fire, learning chemicals, learning, it's almost like a chemistry class if you want to think about it. And, the dangers that are involved, and, just the amount of training I did as a safety officer and as a chief officer, and it's a lot of training, but it's rewarding at the end.
Over your time in the fire service, what has changed?
A lot. I'm going to say a lot. It's changed. The way we fight fires changed. The way you pump a truck's changed. The way you put the ladder up changed. There's a myriad radios. Technology's been infused in the department. It's been interesting, to say the least. But the changes are good.
Mm-hmm.
The changes are good. The changes in the way that the gear's made, the way that it protects you. Little things that are learned over time are incorporated into the changes of the department, and changes that are made throughout the whole fire service. And they're good changes. Some of them are a little weird, but they get the point across eventually when you think about it.
Yeah.
And 9/11 was a good example of a lot of changes came out of 9/11 that helped the fire service. They learned a lot, from that unfortunate day. A lot was learned.
I'm also sure when you joined the fire service, you said 92,
Mm-hmm.
there was no position of safety officer then either.
No, No, and that's, I was the first I'm the first full-time safety officer here in the town. And the guys, you ask the guys, and I take my job very seriously. And I let them know I'm not being a jerk about it. I'm being the safety officer, you know? And it doesn't matter. I'll apply the same things to my own company that I do with the other company, you know, and I'm fair. And I try to be as fair as possible when I deal with that. So
I understand that.
mm-hmm.
So conversely, since 92 when you joined, what hasn't changed?
The friendly rivalries between companies. The brotherhood of the fire service never changes. You know, you always have people who join or to look from the outside and say, you guys are a bunch of nuts. You go into a burning building when everybody else is going out. Why do you do such a thing? And when you explain to them why you do it, they get it. And you say, hey, you know, ever think about joining? Maybe they'll think about possibly putting the gear on and stepping in the boots and doing what we do. And you know, it's just such a rewarding thing. You know, it's a rewarding activity. It's, you know, the guys just, I mean, it's like I said, it's organized chaos at times, but it's good. You know, it's fun. You know, we have good cooking competitions at the firehouse. People try to outdo each other, and that's part of that whole family aspect of it. You know, you want to feed your brothers, but you also want to do better than the guy the month before you. You know, so we try. Sometimes we end up on the short end of it, and we don't do as well as the guy did before us. But still, the guys enjoy it, and they may bust you for, you know, in good nature, you know, ha ha ha, you know, your food stuck to the wall more than it did to my stomach, and you know, you get stuff like that. But you know,
That sounds fun, though.
it is fun. It is fun, and you know, it's the whole aspect of it that's enjoyable, you know, and you know, you get you guys to have their specialties, you know, and they you know which ones are gonna you know, bust your butt, and you know, they're the ones that you gravitate towards, and you know who you have common ground with.
Yes.
You know, even the ones that you don't have common ground with, they're still family. You know, and you still treat them as family.
So how has being a firefighter shaped the rest of your life outside of the fire service?
My wife, knowing her, she's going to say there was a lot of cold meals, a lot of sleepless nights, you know, and she understands what that alarm going off at night or during a meal or what I have to do. And, you know, she understands that. And she's very understanding when it comes down to it. And, you know, she does worry a lot when I go on calls or when my son goes on calls. And, you know, that's to be expected, you know, and she knows what we entail, you know, what the job entails. You know, my mother, when I first joined, was very apprehensive. And she would say, oh, well, you're doing this. And I said, yeah, well, I want to give back to the community. And she encouraged me. My father encouraged me. You know, my siblings encouraged me. And it's just been a great ride all these years.
One person in the family joins, the whole family's part of it.
Pretty much, yeah.
So what advice would you give to the next generation of firefighters?
I would say learn as much as you can. Just be a sponge. Take it in. You know, listen to your officers. Learn the proper way to do things. You know, pay attention in the academy, and do your job safely.
So what do you hope people understand or want people to learn about the fire service that they may not see from the outside?
The most important thing that I can say is that we put a lot of time into this. We're volunteer. We do this out of the kindness of our hearts. And it's important for them to know that we're doing this as we're a small town fire company. We rely on each other, to get the job done, especially in neighboring communities. We're very tightly knit. The fire service has always been that way. And you can walk around to anywhere. I go up to New York City or I go to a different city and everybody looks, hey, I'm a fireman too, or, in the fire service, your peers will give you the shirt off their back no matter who they are. They'll want to associate and talk to you about what you do, and they don't care if you're from a little town in New Jersey or a big city. Everybody has a story. Everybody has the story to tell, and it's important that everybody knows that. That we're here. We do this because we love the town. We love the people in the town, and it's just how it is.
The last question. At the end of the day, what about being a firefighter puts a smile on your face?
At the end of the day, I would say it's knowing that I'm part of something that means a lot to people when they're having a bad day, but is also a brotherhood, sisterhood, it's family. And I just feel that it's, at the end of the day, I can put my head down and say, I made a good decision in 1992 when I joined. My son made a good decision when he joined in 2018. And I hope his children follow in his footsteps and want to do the same thing too, because it is rewarding. And I'm glad I'm glad that you came into my circle here and asked me to do this. I enjoy it. I just I like telling my story and bringing positive influence to the fire service, and hopefully bring some people that want to join in. And that's my whole.
We need more.
Oh yeah, definitely.
We need more.
Definitely. Yeah. It's definitely a brotherhood, I gotta say that. And no matter who's in it, they're your family. I consider the firemen up in, upstate New York or Pennsylvania or halfway around the world, my brothers. And they were welcome in my firehouse. And, that's, hopefully I'd be welcome in theirs.
I'm sure you would. I'm sure you would. All right, Mike. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
Thank you.